So just wanted to, clarify, have some time to have this discussion to talk through a little bit more clearly the vision of, the Sprout Livingstone San Diego, and dive into a little bit, hopefully this will be helpful for those who are hearing about the church, wanting to know more, wanting to go deeper. We have obviously our lead pastor, Daniel Lowe here, Isaac Kim, one of our core team members, and me, I'm Clarence. So yeah, I wanted to talk about the vision, and Daniel, you've explained it as in a lot of different ways. Harassed and like a healing gospel for the harassed and helpless, for those who have uh, left the church or not in the church, who haven't heard it or understood it fully. I want to dive into that. What do you mean by healing gospel, first of all?
What I don't mean about it is it's not a like I'm not talking about come to the front and get healed of all your physical sicknesses and all that. It's not that I don't believe in that, but that's not specifically what I'm referring to here. What we're talking about is like a restorative gospel, a transformational gospel, a gospel that makes impact in a person's life, like right now, and for the future, and for heaven or whatever, obviously. But the reason why we emphasize this is because a lot of the gospels that have been preached do emphasize heaven. They emphasize, hey, it's your relationship with God that you get, which is awesome, and it's getting to be with God after you die. That's basically it. There's no if you're going through some difficulties, does the gospel have anything to say to that? Mm-hmm. If you're going through, you have a lot of anxiety, you're struggling with anxiety, or you're extremely lonely and you're suffering from loneliness, does the gospel have anything to say to that? If you have addictions and you can't get out of it, if you just want to change your life to be full of more joy or more better character or stuff like that, does the gospel have anything to say about that? I think the gospel does. I think it's very clear from the Bible that the gospel is transformative even now. So it's basically saying that the gospel is not just about the quantity of life, meaning how long you get to live forever, which it is, but it's also about the quality of life. That the life that you're going to live and the life that you're living right now is going to be a good one, abundant life, full. So heals a broken life is really what I mean by that.
Yeah. Isaac, so you heard this. Obviously, you've heard Daniel pitch his vision, before. What kind of what captured you, I guess, convinced you enough to move down to San Diego to help start this?
Yeah, I think what Daniel's talking about the healing gospel, about how the gospel transforms your life and causes real life change, is something that I've experienced or tasted, but wasn't fully able to understand how that's part of the point of the gospel. And the gospel is really powerful. So, just becoming a believer, even if that wasn't emphasized, I did experience life transformation. But in my own personal journey of being a Christian, sometimes I would feel like certain aspects of Christianity weren't transformative. It was actually burdensome to, the way that I thought about the gospel or Christianity. One example is like, a lot of times Christianity can be pretty legalistic. It's about following these rules, making sure we have the right doctrines, and making sure we believe the right things. And you can feel really burdened when you don't follow all those rules properly. If you don't read your Bible every day, you feel like, oh, I'm a really bad Christian. I don't pray as much as this person. I'm a bad Christian. But the point of the gospel isn't to make you feel like, oh, you're not living out, these things in the way that you're supposed to. The point of the gospel is to give you life change, to make you into a renewed, transformed human. And that I recognize that conflict in my own personal walk. So when Daniel came to me with his vision, or just through knowing and discussing with Daniel, that began to solidify and crystallize into so what Daniel's talking about.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Part of this healing gospel and the mission of it is a little bit of a shift from what I understand in who this is for, right? Like, who needs this healing gospel? And you quote from Matthew, right, that the passage about Jesus seeing the harassed and helpless. And yeah, I was just wondering if you could clarify a little bit, like, who do you see this church for?
Yeah, I do see it is for people who I think have not experienced the gospel. Like, and what I mean by the gospel is, again, the transformative gospel. So the people that I specifically thinking about are a lot of people who've left the church. And I talked to we all know these people. People who grew up in church, maybe grew up in youth group, but just, church's not for me anymore. Like, why? And there's a lot of different reasons that people give. But I think one of the things I come back to is, okay, they didn't get much out of it. Because sure, there are a lot of negative things about church, that's for sure. And a lot of negative things about any, any organization or any people, any bunch of people. There's a lot of negative things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But usually, if there's enough good stuff, people will overlook some bad stuff, right? And there's always going to be, we're not perfect, right? Nobody's perfect, right? But, I mean, there's so many people leaving the church these days. And the statistics bear it out and all that. The church in America is like going down a little bit. So there's so many people who are leaving these days. It just shows me that there's so many churches probably that where people are not fully experiencing the wow of the gospel or the real change of the gospel. So I am thinking primarily about people who have left the church, but I do also think there are people within the church themselves who are just going to church because they kind of have to, or they go to church because they've gone to it all their lives, or they're going to church because it's good or reasonably good, but is it great? So I think it is also for them too. To experience like wow change, like real change. And I think traditionally a lot of like church plants or missions have focused on people who've never heard the gospel before. And so obviously for them, it's definitely, we want to just give the gospel to them too. And maybe because they have not experienced, they haven't heard the gospel preached to them in the right way, or they haven't heard the transformative gospel. So they could be people who are hear the gospel for the first, not really first time, but kind of for the first time, this gospel also. So I think the focus of the church, if you want to think of who it is, and it really is for people who are leaving the church, but I think it has effects and can really bring in all of these people together too.
Yeah.
So.
Isaac, you moved down, to San Diego. And, you don't have any, I mean, we're friends, right? But like, not a lot of connection, right?
Yeah.
With people. How, you're a Christian, you're a believer. I don't know. I guess the question is like, how do you see yourself then in a church that is seeking this out? A church for those who haven't heard, the gospel, either in this way, right, the fullness of the gospel, or never heard it before, or who have left or rejected. Just tell me a little bit about how you embrace that.
Yeah, I think personally, and I think for a lot of Christians, like evangelism, or the concept of evangelism, is a difficult one. Like going out and preaching the gospel. You mentioned this in the previous video, maybe, where some people you feel like, oh, they're really extroverted and friendly, like great for them. They can go out and talk to all these strangers and like preach the gospel. But for me, that's not my personality. And it is struggling to think. It's hard to think about like how should I evangelize. And I think part of what Daniel is like getting at is that if you experience life transformation, then you're compelled to tell other people. And so moving to a place where I don't know anybody and thinking about how to evangelize, that's really scary. But even, staying where I am and thinking about evangelizing, that's also scary because I don't know how to do it. But if I go to a place that we are all, communally focusing on life transformation, being transformed, living an abundant life, then I think it would actually be much easier, even though I don't know anybody in the area, to talk about the gospel, about who Jesus is, about my new transformed life. And if the people around me are also being transformed, then that's easy too. I just bring someone who's never seen that and just say, hey, look at this, it's awesome. And I don't even have to say anything. But in the old way of thinking about, what the gospel is, like follow these rules and believe these beliefs and doctrines, then that's really on me to like communicate all those things properly to someone, and that person might not even experience transformation. So that view of evangelism and spreading the word it's even more scary than moving to a new place and trying to preach a transformed gospel, transformed life.
Yeah, so good.
I think he explained it better than I could.
Just last thought, I want to kind of hear a little bit on this is, it sounds like a lot of this depends on real transformation happening, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying like people need, or does this mean that everybody needs to have like these like epic stories, or should we like it? Yeah, I just want to hear a little bit more about that, because it sounds like this church is really depending on like, without real people being transformed, like this is just like not really gonna go anywhere, because it's preaching a gospel that transforms lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm all for that. You know what I mean? It is like, oh shoot, if no healing happens, then there's no content. And it is like, oh, you know what? Can I control this? Can I control the transformation? No, I can't. So that's scary, because the entire church is dependent on something that I personally cannot control or make happen. And really, it is, we have to say, okay, God's the one who transforms. He's going to either make this happen or not. And I think that that's part of the scary part of why people have stopped preaching the transformation. People have stopped preaching that gospel, because it's like, well, I don't want to base the whole church on something that I can't guarantee, or I don't want to base the whole thing on something that we don't know for sure if it's going to happen or not. And so that is, I think, why people have stopped preaching about this, right? But I look at the Bible and I don't think, and that's what it talks about, so I can't stop preaching it. That's the problem. I think there are definitely certain ways that because we've only preached certain segments of we haven't preached the transformative gospel, so therefore we also not going to experience it. That's one thing. So there are other elements too. Like I think there are, and we can talk about some of these things, and we will in the values when we talk about the values. There are certain conditions, certain things that about the gospel that actually help bring about the transformation that I think are ignored. So we want to bring all of those in to create the best condition for transformation. And I think many churches don't bring these best conditions. So that's another thing.
Yeah.
So we want to do that. But at the end of the day, it really is, Holy Spirit, please help us. And I love that. That's what I want.
Yeah. It's unpredictable, to to enter into a community like so dependent on God just doing work and being true to, you know, all of, I know in the Bible, it always talks about like, oh, you're dead to, you know, you're now dead to, you were dead in your transgression, now you're alive, right? And like, you know,
Yeah.
the old is gone and the new has come. And it talks about all of this transformation that I do confess it is hard to identify with all the time, you know, even as a long-term church going, you know, Christian, right? Because it is scary to say like God transforms lives and then have to like qualify it, you know, to, you know, for people. But this church is about, you know, really pushing into that truth that when Jesus came, he says, I've got a new life, right? My yoke, right? My yoke is easy, right?
Yeah.
And come to me weary, right? Come to me helpless, harassed, you know, for what I have is salvation, is healing, is transformational. And so I think that's great. I think that's good for this. You know, I hope that helps you understand what the church is centered around, the vision for it, healing gospel, right? For those who have not heard, for those who have left, right, because they didn't experience it. And you know, and it seeks for all who come, whether you're a believer or not, to experience the transformation that comes with the gospel, the truth of Jesus Christ, and a community that you know presses into that, so that so many more will experience it. And so, thank you guys for that. Hope that's helpful.